Just like the street lights lit this town, like a fire in a blaze, gotta burn it down.
All right, here we are, folks.
Can't be afraid to leave this out. We got this far, don't know how. I see danger in us. They know we'll burn down the night. Coming just like the sunrise. You know that we gonna let it out. Tonight, we gonna let it out. Tonight, we gonna let it out. Just like the sunrise, we gonna let it out.
Welcome back once again. This is Chris Report, and he assured me that since I'm down in Boulders, folks, this is Chris Wyatt reporting from South Africa. Hello, folks, and welcome back to the program. This is Chris live in Central Pennsylvania with my guest tonight, none other than constitutional law advocate Mark Oppenheimer. Mark and I have talked about getting together for some time, but I got lost worrying to find out what was going on with the Kill the Boer case, and I never got back to Mark about that. So we weren't able to talk about that because it was ongoing. But today we're going to talk a little bit about the ANC, South Africa, Israel, Gaza, and the International Court of Justice, a topic I've talked extensively about here recently. So let me just greet Mark real quick. Mark, it's a pleasure to have you back. Happy New Year.
Thank you. Great to see you.
It's great to see you as well. You know, it's the time really flies. I mean, did we see each other when I was there in August? I think we did. I'm trying to remember. At least
we did.
We did. Okay, yeah. I'm trying. The days just run together, you know. But yeah, that's right. We did. That's right. We did see each other in August. But yeah, the time goes by very fast. We're into a new year, and of course, we're going to be talking today about Israel. I suspect we'll be talking about proportionality, the law of land warfare, the Geneva Conventions, what's actually happening in Israel, the actions of the ANC, which I've been calling out endlessly. So there should be no surprise to people where I stand on this. And before Mark gets into it, my position is the ANC's case is illegitimate. It's not genocide as described by the Convention on Genocide. And this case to claim it's genocide diminishes what genocide is. Now, look, this is going to offend some people, but it's the same as some people who are very angry about farm murders in South Africa saying that that is a genocide. While that is criminality, and it's clearly an effort by certain groups of people to target a group of people, it doesn't qualify as genocide under the Genocide Convention. So it's a similar thing. I'm consistent in that, so people can't accuse me of being biased one way or the other. Mark, look, it's no secret here. I mean, your faith. I mean, can we share that? I mean, it's just full disclosure. You're Jewish, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, I'll presume that, like me, your faith doesn't color your judgment on this. You're approaching it from an objective position.
Look, I can give you an assessment of what's going on as a lawyer, but I think it would be dishonest for me to say that being Jewish doesn't play a role in my assessment. My grandparents fled Nazi Germany. I've always grown up with the idea that anti-Semitism, lurks in the world, and I think we've seen a huge uptick in anti-Semitism. So, when we have our discussions today, it will be honest, but it'll be passionate.
Excellent. I thought we had a break in the signal there. No, excellent, and I appreciate that. That's the same way I tell people my personal bias, where I'm coming from, and I think that's always helpful for people to understand. In my case, I'm a Christian, and that's where I come from. That, but I have been disturbed. Before we really get into this, I've been disturbed by the rise of anti-Semitism, particularly on campuses here in America and in Europe. I mean, it's really frightening to see the rise of it in Europe. It's in many places. Back when the former German Democratic Republic was merged into the Federal Republic in the 1990 timeframe, there were a lot of attacks on foreigners in the East by neo-Nazis. And of course, one of their ideologies is anti-Semitism. And so it got some attention then, but it faded from a lot of people's view unless they were directly affected by it for a number of years. But it's pretty obvious that anti-Semitism is on the rise everywhere. Now, people are saying that just because you oppose Israel doesn't mean you're anti-Semitic. That's a fair argument, but we're talking about genuine anti-Semitism, attacking people because they're Jewish. American University just got a federal lawsuit from students who are being harassed on campus and not being protected by the school. We saw the nonsense with the University of Pennsylvania, where the Wharton Business School is, also with Harvard University and Claudine Gay and Liz McGill from Penn, and I can't remember the other school. But this is pretty frightening that people won't condemn hatred of a group. And why? Mark, I'll have to plead ignorance here. I grew up all over the country and have lived all over the world, and I have never understood why some people dislike Jews. I mean, they're people of the book. It's the oldest faith among the major faiths out there, and I never got it. And we don't need to get into why people, but to me, it doesn't make any sense. I have no beefs with someone if they're Jewish, if they're from Ethiopia and they have dark skin, or if they're from Ashkenaz Jews or blue eyes and blonde hair. I don't have a beef, so I don't get people's problem with it. But clearly, I think we can agree that there has definitely been a huge uptick in anti-Semitism, and it occurred even before the October 7th attack.
Yeah, without a doubt. I mean, just to address some of what you've said, so I agree that in principle, it's possible to be critical of Israel without being an anti-Semite. But what we have seen is a big collapse in that distinction. So very soon after October 7th, you had protests in Australia outside the Sydney Opera House, where protesters said, fuck the Jews and gas the Jews. They weren't saying fuck Israel. In South Africa, we've had boycotts of Jewish businesses. David Teager, who is Jewish and was the captain of the under-19 cricket side, has been targeted because he's Jewish. So there is clearly a colliding of those views. And I think for a long time, many people have hid behind the idea that they're anti-Zionists when really they hate Jews. Now, there are some Jews who are critical of the Zionist project. And, one can critique the state of Israel. If you go and spend any time living in Israel, you'll understand that Israelis are very critical of their own government, that there is no one political party which has dominance there. It's always done through a multi-party coalition. There's a lot of disagreement about what the policies internally ought to be. So Israelis themselves are going to have various views about what Israel should be, what its laws should be, how it should treat its citizens, the role of its courts, all that sort of stuff. So there's plenty of disagreement about the nature of Israel. But I will say, among Jews, it is an incredibly minority position to be pro-Hamas. So there are a couple of people who call themselves Jews, people like Ronnie Casualties, who celebrated the acts of October 7th. Now,
well, I can interrupt you for just a second. Sorry, Mark. Sorry. Ronnie Casualties is not a Jew. He's a communist. Sorry. He may claim that's his faith, but his real faith is a religion of communism. Anyway, sorry.
Yeah, I think that's right. So I think it's very rare to find Jews who are, have that kind of view who are actually practicing. There's a small subset who get paraded around occasionally by the Iranians who are ultra-Orthodox, who are critical of the state of Israel because they think it should have come about through another mechanism. It's a very, very tiny set. But generally what you're going to find in South Africa is that most Jews view the acts of October 7th as an extreme provocation, an extreme act of anti-Semitism, the worst single day of attacks on Jews since the Holocaust, and are going to be, very supportive of Israel's right to defend itself and to eradicate Hamas.
No, 100% of that. And in the interest of full disclosure, folks, I also, I've lived in Israel. I lived there for several months when I was deployed there back in the 1990s. I lived down near Eilat. On the Gulf of Aqaba down there, heading out to the Red Sea. Some of the saltiest water I've ever got in my mouth in my life when I went snorkeling there. Ooh, still burning. I have those vivid memories of that. But it's so. And as far as it making the distinction, as a non-Jew and as a person who certainly doesn't consider himself anti-Semitic in any way whatsoever, I am critical of Israel and have been critical of Israel for decisions they made. The invasion of Lebanon in '82 is one that I've always raised questions about the way that was conducted and the subsequent ignominy that it brought to the state of Israel. I mean, from a geopolitical standpoint, that's a fair argument, I think. And then more recently, my argument here about what I consider the security failures and the hubris of allowing what happened on October 7th to happen. I've been critical of the Israeli government. A lot of Israelis are not doing introspection right now because they've got to fight. I understand that. But as an outside observer, I was very critical. I mean, who in their right mind puts their primary means of emergency alert communications to notify guard posts on a cell phone network? That's just one example. So that's a criticism of the state of Israel's policies, nothing to do with Jews. I mean, and by the way, October 7th, that brutal assault killed mostly Jews, but it killed Jews, Christians, it killed Muslims, and also it killed Buddhists as well. I mean, they brutalized Filipinos and people from all over the world. They made no distinction. These are sick ghouls. But anyway, so I agree with you. It's you can make that distinction, but that distinction not only has been blurred, I think it's been obliterated by many people. They're nonsense, openly calling for, like you said, gassing the Jews. It's just, how can anybody say that? Yeah. The one country in Europe that's so far stood up for Israel so far has been the Federal Republic of Germany, which is not shocking, but I'm a little surprised based on who's running the country right now. But right now we've seen breaking news that Ireland is going to consider South Africa's case after they look at their facts. Well, I'll tell you what, Ireland, Delvin, I'll send you a bunch of tweets and a couple of my broadcasts. You can use those as your evidence in your case. And then Belgium has also openly said they're going to support South Africa's case while we wait for a judgment. Does that surprise you at all?
Yeah, so I've spoken to some Irish friends. I've got a friend who lives in Dublin who's Jewish, and she said it's the loneliest place to be as a Jew. There's a strange thing that happens for Ireland is that and it's something that you kind of find happening in South Africa as well, maybe, is that Protestants who are sort of aligned with England take a pro-Israel stance, and the Catholics have taken a pro-Palestinian stance in the north of Ireland. So the idea is that they sort of see their own complicated battle mirrored in the Israeli-Palestine conflict, and have sort of then like allocated each other flags, literally flags. So you can go down certain streets and there's Israeli flags and Palestinian flags. I think you find it with some of their soccer teams as well, is that supporters will go and wave Palestinian flags to support their team. It's a strange thing. It really shows a complete lack of insight into Israel's conflict, but they've sort of allocated themselves sides. What you find with the ANC is that they've said some maybe more alarming stuff, which is that Umkhonto we Sizwe and Hamas are analogous organizations. They're both freedom fighters who are pushing back against settler colonialism or apartheid. And again, that just shows a sort of startling lack of awareness. And I would think a very distasteful thing for the ANC to say about itself. So as much as the ANC did some pretty awful things, they did try and avoid, bombing civilians. That you had a policy of saying, okay, well, we need to fight the apartheid regime. And you have some examples where like Magoo's bars bombed, but it wasn't their raison d'etre. There was some level of restraint. You had the ANC like necklacing people, often people who they thought were spies. So the ANC was very good at killing lots of black people. But you didn't find them sort of, going out and randomly killing lots of white people. So it is odd that they would compare themselves to Hamas in a favorable light.
Well, what gets me about this, Mark, is it seems to me there seems to be either wholesale or willful ignorance of history. I mean, again, making that distinction, if I supported Umkhonto we Sizwe, as you mentioned, their reason for existing, the raison d'etre, was not to commit violence against civilians, although we see the People's War, we're talking about their acts. That wasn't Umkhonto so much, it was just operatives in general. But equating your experience with that, with what Hamas is doing, sticking babies in ovens, cutting the breast off of women, gang raping them and shooting them in the back of the head, nailing genitals, taking hostages. I mean, this is the brutality was insane. Tossing grenades into bomb shelters to disfigure and maim people, gunning down innocent civilians in the back of the head. I mean, this was barbarity this is what we saw on the Eastern Front in the Second World War. This is what we saw, the brutality. I mean, not the same sort of thing, but Babi Yar, what happened in Ukraine, and the Einsatz unit and things like that. This is sick. I mean, it takes a twisted mind to even be able to pull off those things. I've served in combat multiple times. I can't imagine even that level of brutality. And for the ANC to openly associate itself with that sort of thing, they're going to the court, but the ANC has never reproached Hamas for its actions on October 7th, but they claim they're objective. Kind of like, Russia and Ukraine. We're not voting. We're neutral here. Funny, you're not really neutral. What's the Lady R doing in Simonstown? But this is honestly beyond the pale what happened on October 7th.
Yes, first of all, as you said, there's the lack of condemnation. So, the Jewish community has had a long relationship with the ANC. There were some prominent people in the ANC who were Jews.
Ronnie Kasrils.
Yeah, Ronnie Kasrils, but less radical, less crazy people as well.
Yeah.
Who played a role. Albie Sachs would be an example, and the Jews have sort of played a role in sort of trying to support the ANC. They were very, community supported Cyril Ramaphosa at various times, and I think expected Cyril to have their back and condemn what happened on October 7th. And instead, what the ANC have done is openly embrace Hamas. In other words, Hamas, which is regarded as a terrorist organization in America, Australia, the UK, and Europe.
43 countries and the European Union.
Yeah. And we invited them to South Africa. We met with them. So you had Fikile Mbalula, a government minister, meeting with Hamas with pictures of Cyril Ramaphosa behind them, commending them, drawing the sort of parallels between Hamas and Umkhonto. You had Naledi Pandor flying off to Iran. This is something worth discussing, is given that the ANC has shown an enormous amount of distaste for international law. So, for example, when Omar al-Bashir was in South Africa and there was an ICC requirement for us to arrest him and hand him over because he was actually charged with genocide, the South African government wanted to withdraw from the Rome Statute, didn't want to hand him over, was compelled by our South African court to do so, and instead Mr. Bashir was smuggled out of the country. It wasn't the only time that we threatened to withdraw from the ICC, because we wanted to host Vladimir Putin here. And so I thought, well, if we withdraw from the Rome Statute, then we can host him. So this is not a country that cares about human rights very much or the international order. So why is it going to the ICJ? Well, the ANC was in enormous financial trouble, so much so that the sheriff was knocking on their door. They owed 100 million rand to debtors. They then engaged in this litigation and fill in the missing gap. The ANC is now flush with money.
Yeah, they have a big party in Nelspruit at Mbombela Stadium there. They 20 million rand on that. They paid off the 102 million debt, plus I don't know if they paid the fines or not. Yeah, suddenly they got all kinds of money. Where's it coming from?
And there's an election around the corner. Who knows? I don't think it's possible for us to work it out. I'm too stupid to work it out.
We need a couple. We need an abacus or something to figure this one out. No, but look, the ANC. This is the same government that twice denied a visa to the Dalai Lama to come to South Africa, ironically, for a conference on racism. The Dalai Lama, who's one of the biggest supporters of the liberation movement around the world, a man whose entire country has been stolen and has been oppressed by the Chinese communists. Talk about human rights abuses. They deny him a visa at the behest of their masters in Beijing. Then when Archbishop Desmond Tutu had his 80th birthday, he was invited and they denied him a visa again. You are correct. This is a government that doesn't believe in international norms. They like to pretend they believe in international norms when it suits their purposes, but their actions belie that. They like to poke needles at the United States about how we intervene in places around the world. But what has South Africa done since 1994? Stuck its nose in Cote d'Ivoire, stuck its nose in Burundi, stuck its nose in Ethiopia and Eritrea, stuck its nose in the Congo and still sticking its nose in the Congo, stuck its nose in Comoros, stuck its nose in Lesotho twice, invaded all these countries, but only America's evil. You got to wonder about that sometimes. It's interesting how they get away with it. And before I give you a chance to jump in here, I don't know if you saw the News 24 fact check of Franz Cronje's comments on the radio, or if you saw my response. What an absolute joke. That isn't even remotely journalism. You just stated factually two things that occurred we saw in the press, including in their own publication, News 24, and their fact checker denied that the ANC ever met with Hamas after October 7th. And then he uses a quote from their press release in which they said, "We hope both sides reach a peaceful resolution." That's not a condemnation of Hamas. Cronje's wrong. They condemned Hamas. Here's the statement. This passes for journalism? No wonder the world is woefully ignorant, I should say. Ugh.
Yeah, as far as fact-checking goes, it's the most bizarre piece. You'd think it's rather an important thing to know where the ANC is getting its money from, right?
Why is the press asking those questions?
right? We have campaign funding legislation in South Africa, right? In other words, if the ANC is not disclosing that it's receiving money from foreign entities like Iran or Qatar or whoever else, that's a problem, right? And it does seem rather strange that they suddenly flush with money after being in financial straits. You'd expect someone to ask some questions. So when France raises this, and by the way, it's known that the ANC have a history of receiving funds from other countries. So before '94, the ANC went around the world and said, we need money because we're the liberation movement. And they knocked on many doors and they said, in return, we will help you out. So if you go and look at South Africa's voting record at the UN, you can see that we have helped out many horrible nations who have a history of abusing people's human rights, that the kinds of things we vote for at the UN look very different from what's in the South African Constitution, which is a classical liberal constitution to a large extent. But the South African voting record, you'd think that we were a very different place. So the inference to be drawn is that we are being paid. And this is kind of a known thing. So it'd be surprising if at this juncture, when the ANC was in so much trouble, to then say, no, thanks, we don't want any money from Iran. Sure. So, but it's worth us discussing the actual merits of the South African case. So you started off by saying, well, the problem with this case is that really belittle the term genocide, and I agree with you. So we need to ask, well, what is the requirement in the Genocide Convention? Well, the idea is that a state must have the intent to destroy in whole or in part a national group or an ethnic group like the Palestinians. Intent. And there are various measures you could take. Intent. So the genocidal intent is very important. And so, it is amazing that everyone can go and watch the proceedings. They're available to watch, and you see Tembeka and Gatobi arguing this point for the South African case around genocidal intent.
Now, isn't he the same guy that argued that kill the Boer isn't genocidal? It doesn't lead to violence? Is that the same?
Yes.
Okay.
It is the same person. Just to check that.
No hypocrisy there whatsoever. Just saying.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, and just to further push the point, one of the bits of evidence that Mr. Gatobi relies upon is soldiers singing a song called "Wipe," where they say we must wipe out the seed of Amalek. And from this, he wants to say, well, this is absolute proof of genocidal intent from the state. Whereas, kill the Boer, I don't know how anyone could possibly think this was targeted at Afrikaners. It's clearly just metaphorical speech.
Yeah, and it's not like it's people around a braai singing it. It's a member of parliament and his party leaders singing it. I mean, it couldn't be more obvious. So talk about hypocrisy. Anyway, go ahead. I'm sorry, Mark. It's just I had to jump in with that. That was too much to miss.
Yes, yeah, and you're not the only person to have picked up on it. So what is the kind of evidence led? Well, there's a series of statements, often from people who are not representatives of the state. So you have the soldiers, there's a 95-year-old war veteran. They refer to someone called Danny Neumann, who they say was a former member of the Knesset, who said we should obliterate Gaza. Turns out Danny Neumann was a football commentator. So there's a lot of bad fact-checking going on. There's other stuff that they do which is just disingenuous. So my obligation as a lawyer, people might be surprised to know this, my primary obligation is to the court, not to my client. My obligation is not to mislead a court. I must run my client's case, but I cannot mislead a court, which means you don't lie about the quoted information that you use. So you need to go and check who is Mr. Danny Neumann. So, there was this sort of false video floating around Twitter, so they used that instead of checking that. They also just removed certain things from the quotes. So they refer to the Israeli Minister of Defense, and they have this abbreviated quote where it looks like he's saying we must obliterate Gaza. But if you translate the quote properly, it's very clear that he says we must obliterate Hamas. There's a huge difference between attacking the terrorist organization and attacking the civilians. They did a similar thing with regards to Netanyahu quotes, where they would selectively, take out certain sections. And then the Amalek quote as well, they misattribute. So Amaleks are referred to in different portions of the Bible. The one where Netanyahu is talking about, he says, don't forget Amalek, is a reference to when the Jews were fleeing Egypt, the Amalekites went and took them by surprise and killed a bunch of Jews. And later in the book of Samuel, which is hundreds of years later, there's this injunction to sort of, obliterate Amalek. Now, it's quite clear if you look at what Netanyahu is saying, he's referring to the first set, saying that Hamas is like Amalek in that they caught us by surprise. And so you have this disingenuous attribution. The other thing worth knowing about Amalek is that hundreds of meters away, so within walking distance of where the ICJ is, there is a monument to the Jews that were murdered during the Holocaust, which mentions Amalek, and it's a reference to the Nazis being Amalek. So it's quite obvious that Amalek is meant to refer to Hamas, not the Palestinian people. And you have lots of statements from the state of Israel, from Herzog and from Netanyahu, saying that we have an obligation to preserve civilian life, that the loss of any civilian life, whether Jewish or Palestinian, is regrettable, and it's a tragedy. That's not the kind of thing that a genocidal state would say. And also their actions show that they're not out there to obliterate the Palestinian people. So you don't go and warn people in advance, we're going to drop bombs. You don't provide safe corridors. You don't allow for humanitarian aid in. To get a sense as well, one of the things the South Africans do is they say, well, you've got this ratio of civilians to militants that are killed, and they have a 2-to-1 ratio. And I think, it's a terrible thing that you have civilians dying in any conflict. War is a horrible thing. But you need to say, well, what does that look like in comparison to other wars? So, for example, in the Yugoslavian war, when NATO was fighting the Serbs, you had a 4-to-1 ratio, 4 civilians for every Serbian militant that was killed. Also, you have very special circumstances in Gaza in that Hamas embed themselves in civilian areas. They're hiding in mosques, in schools, in hospitals, and are using people as human shields. So every civilian life that is lost is tragic, but a lot of that blame is really going to fall on behalf of Hamas. They've created a situation. The war would end immediately if Hamas surrendered and handed over the hostages. So all those civilian lives are regrettable. It's a terrible thing, but you can't blame Israel for it.
Absolutely. Sorry, I was just giving you a second there. There's a couple of topics we need to talk about here. We're going to get to it, but I've talked about this in my broadcast before, and as an attorney, I'm sure that you're familiar with this. And so let me just get us both back up on screen side by side. I had just the speaker on there because I was focusing on you. But I approach this not from a position of Christianity, Judaism, or Islam, or from a religious perspective, but as a layperson who's responsible in following the law and has also trained people in the law of land warfare, the Geneva Conventions, and military necessity, and that sort of thing. I approach it from that standpoint as a retired colonel. And I've been a judge, but, in military courts, that doesn't qualify me to be a judge on genocide. But my point is that there are things that come into play here. So, for instance, mosques, schools, and clinics are off limits unless and until a belligerent uses it as a base of operations or conducts military operations there. By doing that, they've made it a legitimate target. You are allowed to pursue that. And that's what Hamas has done from the outset here. That's their intent. They want this carnage. They don't care about lives in Palestine. They don't care about Palestinians. They are trying to achieve a goal here. And their goal is, I think, to get a lot of hatred towards Israel, because there's no way on October 7th that they knew they were going to win. They weren't going to destroy Israel. They didn't go any further than just crossing across the border a few miles. So 3 points that we need to talk about here regarding the use of force here. So there's a question of whether it's military necessity, so whether you have to use it in order to achieve the goals that are necessary to defeat your opponent. So military necessity, the rule of distinction between things like schools and mosques and clinics and military targets. And then the one that I've criticized, I haven't criticized, but I said, if people want to make a criticism of Israel, it's legitimate. And that's not a law or a rule, but the principle of proportionality. The military principle of proportionality, which we adhere to, and most militaries around the world adhere to, although if you're a civilian, it may not feel that way. But the principle of proportionality means that you're not supposed to use more force than is necessary to achieve your means. Now, a lot of people look at Gaza because we're getting very selective shots of just totally obliterated. It looks like Stalingrad, the cityscape. But people need to bear in mind that Gaza is densely packed. It's one of the most densely packed places in the world with high rises everywhere. And the fact that Hamas is intentionally putting themselves in and amongst those situations leads to this. So the principle of proportionality, I think, is legitimate, and we should hold Israel to that. But it's difficult to assess whether they're being proportional or not right now based on the threat they're facing, because none of us, except Israeli intelligence and soldiers on the ground, are aware of what they're actually facing every day. What do you think of that?
Yeah, so I think one of the mistakes people make on proportionality is they think that it's an accounting ledger exercise. So what you're meant to do is just count the number of civilian deaths on either side. So often some of the reporting that I see, you see something along the lines of 12,000 civilians lost their lives on October 7th and 24,000 Palestinians have been killed. Okay, so that sort of shows, this seems disproportionate. So first of all, we must look at those civilians who lost their lives in Israel didn't just lose their lives. they were murdered on purpose.
They were butchered savagely.
Yeah, in some of the most gruesome possible ways, right? Torture, rape, all that sort of stuff. And there you really do have genocidal intent. Those people are killed because they are Jews. And a lot of those people, are peaceniks. They were, living in the desert. They'd had Palestinian workers coming in from Gaza. They had taken them to hospitals when they were sick, and they were killed.
And that's the reward for being good neighbors.
Yeah, it's a very horrible thing. Now, what you're supposed to do, as you mentioned with the proportionality test, is you say, first of all, what is the military objective? Okay. Now, there could be a number of objectives. The one is there's the particular operation we're involved in. So we're trying to wipe out this, set of Hamas commandos. There's also the sense of saying Hezbollah are in the north. A lot of people don't discuss the fact that hundreds of thousands of Israelis have been driven out of their homes because you've got attacks from the north. Yep. They are living outside of their homes. So you need to be able to send a deterrent message to say that we could wind up in a situation where other hostile states come in and try and obliterate us and take this as an opportunity to do so. You've got, Houthis in Yemen who are, doing all sorts of things at the moment. And so it's quite important to be able to send a signal. That's one military objective that you can have. So you've got to say, well, what was the subjective thoughts that the military commander had when they engaged in that particular strike, not the entire operation? And then you've got to say, well, did they try and minimize civilian casualties and anticipate that there could be collateral damage? So there's a difference between saying, let's try and kill the civilians because they're civilians, let's go and wipe out the Gazans as the people, versus saying, look, we can take out these commandos, we're going to try and warn civilians to leave. And then unfortunately, Hamas wouldn't let them leave. And so when we dropped the bombs, civilians got killed. So that's you're operating inside the parameters of proportionality. But as you say, a lot of it is going to be difficult to determine during the fog of war. And so what South Africa has done in this case, first of all, they haven't targeted individuals. They haven't said Commander so-and-so has committed war crimes. What they've done is say that the state of Israel is engaged in a genocide. And this is largely political theater. So you've got a two-step case. I think a lot of people might not know this, but what you have at the moment is preliminary measures that are sought, which are to stop Israel from engaging in military conduct in Gaza. By the way, there's no concomitant measure to stop Hamas from firing rockets into Israel. So you've got the one side must tie its hands behind its back and just take it, and the other side can do what they like. That seems like a problem. But that the second part of the case would be to say that Israel has actually committed a genocide. That's the merits portion, and that may take many years. What's sought at the moment is this sort of interim relief. And South Africa has to prove that there is a plausible case of genocide. And as I say, from the evidence that they've used, they haven't met that standard. The Israelis who were also ambushed by South Africa, because South Africa brought this case on the 29th of December when most reasonable people are sitting on a beach, and asked for a hearing within the first week of January. So the Israeli team had a very short time to respond, but they did an outstanding job.
Well, I would say in that respect that for folks that don't understand, we've talked about this because South Africa and other African countries muddy the water with the International Criminal Court. The ICC has been muddied. People don't pay attention. It's created by the Rome Statute, largely drafted by American lawyers as a consequence of Bosnia and Rwanda. That's why it came about, the world's collective guilt over not taking action in those two conflicts and the horrific loss of life. So the Rome Statute came about, largely drafted by Americans, and then we refused to ratify it because it didn't protect military and politicians, and so we were not part of the Rome Statute initially, and I think we're still not in, if I'm not mistaken. But so African countries gleefully signed up to it. It's an international agreement. We look good. We sign up to it. We adhere to it. But under the original situation of the Rome Statute is it only took cases in jurisdictions where the party was a signatory. So, for instance, in the case of South Africa, someone committed crimes against humanity or war crimes in South Africa, then they could refer that case. But it was only supposed to be cases that countries were unwilling or unable to pursue. And this was a consequence of Rwanda having thousands of genocideers, and they couldn't try them all, although they did come up with their own system eventually, which seemed to do the trick. But the point was, if your country is unable because of political circumstances, maybe you're on the knife edge of, this conflict and you're trying to get peace again, you don't want to prosecute the former president or general, so you can refer them to the ICC. In the case of Bashir, they never signed it, so they issued a warrant based on a judgment coming from the UN at some point. But anyway, the point here is that all these African countries, including South Africa, signed up to it when it sounded like, ooh, look, we're part of the team. But then when it didn't suit their purposes, they start denigrating and saying it's targeting Africans, it's racist, when most of the people convicted of crimes at the ICC are actually white Europeans from Yugoslavia by numeric numbers. Slobodan Milosevic, Karadzic, all these other guys. So anyway, the point here is that it's that's important for people to understand. It's not the ICC, which is a recent development. The International Court of Justice, the ICJ, has been around for decades, and its purpose is to settle disputes between states. And that's my second point right there. What is the dispute between Israel and South Africa? The Genocide Convention allows for a case to be brought if a party feels aggrieved and they can prove it, but they haven't proved anything here. But they have to actually have a dispute. And in this case, they would have to engage Israel and have a discussion and discuss it, talk about it in one way or fashion or another before they go to the court. But South Africa created a pretext. This is a bogus dispute. There's no dispute. There are no South Africans being affected by genocide in South Africa, and Israel is not targeting South Africans in Israel. So there's no dispute here from my perspective as a layperson. You can correct me on this when I'm done if it's necessary. But that's my perspective as a layperson. It's illegitimate because South Africa, knowing the diplomatic community was on holiday, sent this note verbal. And I worked in embassies. I know how this works. They sent a note verbal. Also, this is the same South African government which has been threatening to close the Israeli embassy since October. And they've given a demarche to the Israeli ambassador, treating him like he's a little boy and telling him they're going to kick him out of the country, telling the press almost every week they're going to kick the Israelis out. Then they send them a note verbal knowing that their staffing is probably at 1/4 of normal staffing. And then they go to the beach. Durko goes to the beach. So they don't answer the phone when the Israeli embassy in Pretoria calls them back. This is all a fictional pretext. That's my issue. I would dismiss this case if I was sitting on the judge up there. I'd say you have no basis for this. If you want to present this argument, you can come back after sitting down with Israel and discussing the case. Anyway, and also their argument, it's urgent. Really? October 7th? The Israelis didn't attack for, 2 or 3 weeks before they finally went across the border. And now we've had 7, 8 weeks before you bring this to the court. That's not urgent. It's just politics.
Yeah, I'll say a couple of things on it. The one is, I think the South Africans had been working on the case for a very long time. It's an 84-page document, 500 footnotes, the biggest legal team I've ever seen in any case. So it's 4 senior counsel, 2 King's Counsel, 3 junior counsel, and a Partridge and a Pear Tree, right? I mean, it's this huge, huge team.
I hope they all did better than 30, 30, 30, 30, and 40 on their matrix.
But in terms of the legality, so there's 2 questions just to disambiguate it. So the one question is, can you, as a state that's not party to the conflict, initiate a complaint? And so I think we have some jurisprudence on this in the case of the Gambia versus Myanmar. So the Gambia brings this complaint against Myanmar for alleged genocide against the Rohingya, and there the court says the Gambia has the requisite power to bring the case because they're both signatories to the Genocide Convention, and there's this erga omnes jurisdiction. So I think South Africa, let's say, has the power to brought it. But as you point out, the second part is the failure to declare a dispute properly. And so that, I think, is something that the court will consider, and there's argument that's raised on that by Malcolm Shaw, where he says, well, you've got to have a meeting. You actually have to disagree with each other, and you haven't done that. So I think that's a problem, and we'll see what the court does on that front, whether it dismisses South Africa's case on that technical basis. But that would be something available to them. But there is also the sense of, South Africa is clearly involved in a sneak attack on the litigation front. That you're trying to catch Israel unaware by bringing this so late in the day and asking for this super, super urgent hearing.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think we're in agreement there. I said that they're although I don't think it's right, they have a basis to bring it because they both signed the Genocide Convention. So that is the case. Israel signed it. They signed it in 1948. They were one of the first signatories to it, signing that Genocide Convention right after they became a state. Yeah, no, it's incredibly frustrating here because it's just so wrapped up in emotion. And then we've got all these political actors playing political games for political benefit. Look, I get the domestic beef with Bibi Netanyahu. My first experience with Bibi Netanyahu was the ambassador to the United States during the Gulf War, and of course his brother was the special forces guy that was the only casualty in the raid on Entebbe, and so those two things is how he came to my attention. But I've watched his political career over the years, and there are a lot of people that don't like Bibi in Israel. That's fine. There are a lot of people who don't like Trump. Whatever, get over it. But the blatant open hostility to Netanyahu without any rational thinking behind the comments that public figures are making, that social media, you can't count that, but I mean, it's there. It's everywhere. The fake journalists and legacy media, the things they're writing, abusive towards Bibi Netanyahu. And I'm not defending Bibi Netanyahu. I got his biography right here, but I'm not defending him. But the point is that it's not even remotely objective. There doesn't seem to be any effort on the part of people on both sides of this conflict to be objective. You and I are being, I think, objective here. We're both obviously influenced by our own personal biases, and we both admitted that, which almost nobody wants to do. So, I mean, what do you think?
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, the South Africans brought just the most incredibly biased case. So, as I said, you've got this juicy not to mislead a court. If you'd been in a coma and you woke up and you watched that case, you would think that the Israelis, out of nowhere, decide to go and kill a bunch of Palestinian kids. That's what the case looks like. There's no mention of October 7th. There's no mention of the fact that Israel is involved in a war to defend itself. In other words, one of the reasons why you have to engage in that war is because Hamas have said we're going to have an October 7th again and again and again. So you have a right to self-defense in terms of Article 51 of the UN Charter. By the way, the South Africans say that Israel doesn't have that right to defend itself from Hamas. I mean, that's lunacy. And the claim is that because Gaza is not a separate state, so they say you can't defend yourself against militants. Now, what's interesting, of course, is that Malcolm Shaw then said, well, I'm going to read you an article that you yourself penned, Professor Lowe, where you say that a state can defend itself against not only other states, but against any armed attack, which is the language used in Article 51. So there's this bizarro land where you can make a special rule for Israel that Israel must just sort of turn the other cheek when a terrorist group goes and kills its civilians, and there's no right to self-defense. And your prior articles deny that. So as I say, what's interesting about the case is that there's a lot of pulling on the heartstrings. I think if you watch the South African case, I think reasonable person's heart is going to go out to the poor civilians who've lost their lives in this conflict, and it is a tragic thing. But as I say, the reason for that is that Israel has a right to defend itself. It has an obligation to its citizens to eradicate Hamas, who pose an ongoing threat to them. It has an obligation to the hostages to rescue them. And unfortunately, war is not a case of giving out hugs and kisses. You have to use military strength. And so the Israeli line is that every lost civilian life is a tragedy, and we're taking all these measures to prevent it. In a lot of detail, the Israelis talk about the humanitarian relief that they've engaged in. Unfortunately, you're in this terrible situation where Hamas have a long history of smuggling in, various things through humanitarian lines. I mean, instead of building schools and hospitals with concrete, they've built terror tunnels so they can go and kidnap Israelis, right? They've used plumbing so they can build pipes. Instead of building pipes, they've used it for building rockets. So you have to go and inspect these things to sort of see what's coming in. You also have these UNRWA schools where I think it's 3 out of 4 of the perpetrators of the October 7th massacre went to those schools. So the UN hasn't really covered itself in glory on this front. I imagine that for them to operate under the Hamas regime, they have to make all these compromises. But it does seem like to some extent they've been co-opted by that regime.
Well, yeah, you talk about Israel's right to defend itself. It has a right. It has a responsibility, as you also said, to its citizens, to its 6 million plus Jews, to its 1.7 million Muslims, to its Christians and its Druze population who live in that country. It's a multi-ethnic, diverse kaleidoscope of people with bright, shiny, ruddy pink complexion like me to dark brown and black. It's a country full of people from the Levant and from all over the world who've come to Israel, and those who've been there all along. It's they have responsibility. But another piece of this that's completely ignored by all of this is that, and this shows the ignorance of people, Mark, when this thing started, you see the protest, Israel out of Gaza. Newsflash, they withdrew from Gaza in 2005 and said, here, it's yours. And they've been out of there. They provide the electricity. They provide water into there. They provide all these services in there. And then when they shut the electricity off because the terrorists use it, it's a human rights violation. I'm sorry, did anybody build a power plant in Gaza? Anyway, but what's neglected in this whole story, and this drives me nuts, is that the reason Israel has the best air defense anti-ballistic missile system on the planet is because Hamas fires rockets into kibbutz, schools, clinics, hospitals, malls, residential centers, and murders Israelis and foreign nationals every single day for the past 15 plus years. These are acts of war, all of which augur for a retaliation. But Israel has been resistant as long as the Iron Dome worked. They held back on retaliation. And now they state unequivocally that Hamas will be exterminated, and people are equating Hamas with the Palestinian people. Now, I can blame the residents of Gaza for the government of Hamas. They voted for them, more voted for Hamas than Fatah or the other group. I can't remember now. I think it's Fatah. But anyway, so you can blame them for that. But Palestinians aren't Hamas. Hamas aren't the Palestinians. These are evil people that are up to something, and they're getting a lot of help from outside, and obviously some of it's coming from Iran, as we've seen. So that bothers me, Mark, that this is not addressed. I mean, Israel has been under attack, war, daily, with these. Who fires? I mean, can you imagine that? You're sitting in the Netherlands. Oh, what was that? Oh, there's a missile coming in from France. What? Come on, seriously? That's what's happening in Israel every single day, and that's never talked about.
Yeah, I mean, you have this extreme scrutiny of Israeli action. The number of resolutions by the UN against Israel totals the resolutions against every other country in the world. Israel, by the way, I think it's the size of New Jersey. It is a very, very small place. When you zoom out and you look at all the surrounding Arab states, who, by the way, on prior occasions tried to obliterate Israel, in 67, in 48, in 73.
73, yep. 56, 56 as well.
Yeah. It's the only homeland for Jews, and the sort of focus on this is the settler colonial state. We must be so concerned about this. Let's say you're a Muslim supremacist. Let's say you say, you know what, fuck everyone else. No one else's lives matter. Only Muslim people. Okay. Well, then you should be really, really concerned about the treatment of the Uyghurs in China. You should be really
or the Rohingya in Myanmar.
Yeah. Or the Afghanis who are being pushed out of Pakistan, or people that are being slaughtered in Syria or in Sudan, right? All of whom are Muslim. Do you see anyone taking to the streets and complaining? No. Do you see mass rallies? No. So what's the difference?
Do you see anyone complaining about Shiite Iranians firing missiles into Iraq, Syria, and Pakistan to kill Sunni Muslims? No, nothing. Hypocrites. This is all Jew hatred. It's hatred of the state of Israel. And that's what it is. I don't see it as anything else.
That seems like a reasonable inference to draw, that when the scale of Muslim lives that have been lost at the hands of other perpetrators or other Muslim factions just completely and utterly dwarfs the number of Palestinians who've lost their lives, but the only complaints are raised about Israel, then you start to say, maybe it's because you hate Jews. The other thing that's sort of astonishing, and you mentioned at this beginning, is American campus protesters. And there's some quite sort of amusing and sickening videos where you have these campus protesters holding up signs saying from the river to the sea, Palestine shall be free. And you have people interviewing them saying, can you tell me which river? And they go, geez, that's a hard one. But I think the sea is the Black Sea.
Black Sea,
maybe it's the Red Sea. Like
they have no idea. Yeah, it's
no clue, right?
They're just chanting nonsense, and they're perpetrating this idiocy. Let me address a comment real quick here that's in the chat from Michael Holmes. Michael is to the left here. Mike, thanks for being here. I've never called you Mike before, but he comes frequently. He said, then Chris, when is it too much? When is too much too much? How many kids and women elderly have to die for you to say this is unacceptable? Well, Michael, I'll repeat what I said on October 7th. One civilian is too many. One child is too many. But this is not a consequence of Israel invading Gaza and attacking civilians. This is a consequence of the criminal conduct, the crimes against humanity, and I'll call them what they are. They're crimes against humanity. Crimes against humanity committed by Hamas, and not one or two terrorists. Thousands of these people poured across the border and committed this butchery and savagery. And that's not an emotional response, although I've raised my blood pressure a little bit. Let me bring it back down. The reality here is that these deaths could stop in a heartbeat if what Mark said earlier happened. Hamas would raise its hands, surrender, be arrested, be prosecuted before military tribunals for their crimes against humanity, and release the hostages. The war is over. The war only continues because Hamas. Israel, what was Israel doing October 6th? Were they invading Hamas? Were they invading Gaza? By the way, they want to exterminate the Palestinians. What about the 2 million that live in Judea? What about the 2 million that live in Jordan? What about the hundreds of thousands? They're not going around sending Spetsnaz teams into Tunisia to murder Palestinians or into Ohio to kill them. They're not trying to kill Palestinians. They're trying to exterminate Hamas. Again, was Israel attacking Gaza on October 6th? No. And they wouldn't have been attacking him on October 8th if what happened hadn't happened. And of course, they weren't attacking him October 8th. It wasn't until the end of October. So, Michael, one is too many. I've lived in combat too many times. Any death for political purposes, which is what war is unnecessary. There is no justification for warfare. And this comes from a 36-year Army veteran, not a peacenik, and a person who will stand up and take a rifle in my arm again if I'm required to. Because deterrence is necessary, and evil people must be punished and stopped from their deeds. Sorry, Mark, I had to go on a little bit of a rant there. And that wasn't directed at Mike. He asked a good question, but one is too many.
Sure, and that is the Israeli line, right? Which is that every loss of civilian life is tragic, and you must ask why it's happening, and it's because of Hamas's actions. And I think other states around the world can count themselves fortunate that they don't have to have a terrorist body at their doorstep. So you never have to make these hard choices. You never have to engage in a war because you're free from it. But it's very easy to be an armchair general and say, "Oh no, the Israelis have taken too much of a strong stance here." When you're not under threat, under constant existential threat. So yeah, it is regrettable, but they have to prosecute their war. It's an important thing. They've got to defend their citizens.
There's a couple things coming in the chat. One of which I'll get to now is that question about past deals. I'm going to say this, and you can correct me on this if you know the history better than me, but this is my recollection of it. Ehud Barak pretty much lost his position as prime minister because he offered more than anyone has ever offered to the Palestinians. A two-state solution, even joint governance of Jerusalem in the future. He put it on the table. No Jewish leader, no Israeli politician has ever offered that before. He offered control. He offered funding. He offered peace. And Arafat and the PLO and the Palestinians said, foot sec. We don't want any part of it. That was the closest we ever possibly got, I think, to having a peaceful solution at that time. The Palestinian leaders do not want peace. They have repeatedly refused peace. They don't want to have peace talks. That's my position on it. I don't know if you disagree or if I got that wrong about Ehud Barak.
Yeah, I think that's a good assessment. That's one of the more recent peace deals that was on the table. Yeah. But you had a series of peace deals. At the establishment of Israel, at that juncture, the Palestinians were offered a state. Now, the other thing as well, you sort of get this zeroing in on the map of Israel, and there's sort of a sense of, this is really unfair, that Jews are getting this slice and the Palestinians are getting this slice. You've got to sort of zoom out a little bit in time and in space, and to realize that Transjordan was given to Arabs, which is now, for the Hashemite kingdom. A lot of Palestinians live in Jordan. Before what you had was the Ottoman Empire, which becomes the British Mandate. And so all of those countries in that region are Arab states. And by the way, there were a lot of Jews that lived in that region.
Oh, in Iraq, in Syria, in Lebanon, Tunisia, Libya, Algeria, tons of Jews. Morocco, lots, but most of them are gone.
700,000 Jews. Where are they now? They're not in those countries because they got driven out. It's almost entirely free of Jews, deliberately so, because they were chased out of their homes. So, as you point out, Israel is different in the sense that you have a lot of Arab Israelis. So people who are Israeli citizens, who can be members of the Knesset. You've got Arab Israelis who are on the court, who have...
They serve in the IDF. They've been general officers in the IDF, in the police forces. They own property. They vote in elections. They live peacefully. They are Israeli citizens. And we're talking about 1.7 million Arabs, most of whom are Muslims. Some of them are Christian.
Yeah. There is some restriction, I think, on some Arab Israelis serving the IDF. So Bedouins do, but not all do. No. But it's a conscripted thing. So in some senses, there's the benefit of not having to serve. But it is an interesting thing in terms of patriotic duty. If you go before October 7th, you had a lot of internal tension in Israel. So you had weekly protests about judicial reforms. And you had people saying that, who were reservists, saying we're not going to sign up. October 7th happened and they said we need 200,000 people to sign up to be reservists, and 300,000 arrived. Israelis have realized that it's not worth fighting each other, that there's a genuine threat to them, and have done everything they can to support soldiers, to get them the correct equipment. People just basically got up and left without anything. So, afterwards they're like, I don't have a toothbrush, I don't have a sleeping bag, I don't have a ceramic chamber in my vest, and I'm not going to wear one unless everyone in my unit wears one. So, you had lots of people sort of making sure that they could be protected. So yeah, it's a very valiant effort that they're engaged in.
Well, look, a lot of this stuff, this support for Palestine that's going on, is just bogus. We've talked a little bit about it here. People woefully uninformed about what's going on. It reminds me. I was in France in September for the Rugby World Cup, and I went to where's the town where Jean d'Arc is from? Anyway, I can't think of it right off the top of my head. Orléans, the Maid of Orléans. I went to Orléans, went to Cathedral there, and I walked down the main street. Typical European, medieval sort of town, although it's more Renaissance buildings. But anyway, you get the point. And you get shops on both sides. And at the end of the street is a huge cathedral. What do I see hanging with these massively oversized Ukrainian flags? This is in September of 2023. And they're like the only people in the world still, I've got my Ukrainian flag. I got my Ukrainian flag. And this is the same sort of thing going on here. Virtue signaling. It's not real. You want to support Palestinians? Then where were you before October 7th? Where were you engaging in this? Why weren't you protesting? It's annoying. It's a bumper sticker is what it is. And unfortunately, a lot of people in Western Europe and in the United States and Canada and Australia and New Zealand are people who've immigrated from that region and blindly follow the nonsense rather than think objectively. It's very frustrating. If you come to this country, you have to accept our norms and values, whatever your origin, whether you're Jewish, Muslim, Christian, Buddhist, doesn't matter. We accept everybody here. Doesn't matter if you're white, black, brown, blue, green. Well, if you're green, we might notice. But, other than that, we don't really care. That's the truth of the matter, despite the lies told about America. Otherwise, people wouldn't be beating down our door to get in here. And we wouldn't be naturalizing 700 to 900,000 foreign nationals as American citizens every single. It's bigger than the population of Bloemfontein every year becomes American citizens. Imagine that. But the point here is that if you come here, you've got to accept the norms. It doesn't mean you can't protest when something's legitimate. And as I said, if people want to question the proportionality, I think they have a legitimate argument there. I'm not going to say I agree with it, but it's a legitimate argument to raise. If people want to raise points about the conduct of some soldiers in the IDF on social media, legitimate point. I wouldn't tolerate that in my forces. Those troops would have been disciplined for that. That's not acceptable what they're doing. That brings shame to the IDF, a noble military in my view. But criticizing and raising questions, or if you want to protest about the loss of civilian life, okay. But when you block roads, when you shut down institutions, when you chase people away, when you attack Jews on campus, that's not acceptable. That is not acceptable. And people who behave in that fashion have no right to be guests in my country, and they shouldn't be here. And that's not xenophobic. That's just a statement of fact.
Yeah, and I suppose what's happening in America is, reaping the rewards of a certain kind of anti-Israel bias that's been there since the 70s. So you have like Israeli Apartheid Week that goes on American campuses and South African campuses.
BDS.
Yeah, you've got the BDS movement. Yeah. So you've got this sense of saying, and then here's the other absurd thing we haven't talked about, is the strategic alliance idea. So we say, okay, if you're black or you're gay or you're trans, you're all part of the same family, and the Palestinian cause is part of this family. So you have the gays for Gaza. You go, okay, that's very interesting. Have you ever thought about going? Why don't you go and lend a bit of support to the guys? Why
don't you go live in Gaza? Go live in Gaza and be openly gay, RuPaul.
Yeah, they're going to elevate you off a fucking building. Okay, I must think you deserve.
Oh, they love me. Look at this. They're putting me on top of the building for everybody to see. Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah. I mean, here's the other one that blew my mind was you had all these young women on TikTok saying, oh my goodness, I've just read Osama bin Laden's letter to America and it's changed me. And I've realized that, America is this terrible place and Osama had it right. And, I celebrated it when we found him and killed him and I realized I was wrong. If you get to the end of that letter, one of the things that said is, America deserves death because of their tolerance of gay people, right? It's sort of astonishing that the lesson that was learned, instead of going, oh, fuck, all this woke stuff leads to, 9/11. You go, no, 9/11 was a good thing. It was a wake-up call for America.
Look, you know what I call that? I call that Che Guevaraism. That's what I call that. So when I grew up, grew up, but when I went to university in the early 1980s, and as a young man, for me, the 80s were my decade. Okay, so I'm sorry, I'm going to own it. It was the best music decade ever. Anyway, but the 80s. So at that time frame, the time of Che was getting further apart. His death had already happened, and now he's being reinvented on college campuses as some kind of hero who, he stands up for the oppressed. The guy was a scumbag, is an absolute scumbag, and he's an interloper he's not even from Cuba. He's not from Africa, but everywhere he went, he's starting conflicts and shooting and murdering people and executing people in foreign countries. Yet people run around with a picture of Che on their shirts like it's some, great badge of honor. I mean, that's the same thing we're seeing here. I call it the Che Guevaraism. We're seeing the exact same sort of thing. It's nonsense with what you talk about Osama bin Laden. How anybody who has even an inkling of what happened. It's interesting, Mark, because Saturday is the anniversary of the Paris Peace Accords being signed to end the Vietnam War. Now, it didn't end the Vietnam War. The next day, all the parties went back to war except the Americans, but it was an excuse for America to get out of Vietnam after a long, traumatic experience. And people completely forget what happened. They just don't remember. And it as a historian, for me, it just beggars the imagination. I mean, I find all history interesting, whether it's Khoi history, or whether it's the original Trek Boers, the Griquas, and the Orlums moving north to get away from the authorities. I find all history interesting. I even find the history of Jews very fascinating. But what disturbs me is things in my lifetime that people are woefully ignorant of. And now it's things that are in the last 2 decades that people are woefully ignorant of. It's just insane to see people. And I've seen these things on TikTok you're talking about, and I'm like, whoo, man, it's a good thing I'm not younger, because I wouldn't be calling you for a date.
I mean, it's even more astonishing than that. The levels of denial of what happened on October 7th.
Oh, I've seen that now. I've seen that on Twitter. It's insane. People are saying the Israelis made it up. Are you what?
Yeah, I was on CakeNet on South African television, sitting next to a guy who's a politics professor. The guy's got a PhD. And he says to me, the rapes never happened. It's Israeli propaganda, and the Israelis killed their own people. And you think, wow, the Holocaust deniers are hard thing to get your head around. You'd be like, oh, yeah, it's 75 years. This is months ago. Hamas fucking filmed themselves doing this stuff. Hamas just released a statement now where they say, we didn't kill any civilians. I mean, it's just astonishing, the levels of sort of like doublethink that you have to have. I just got back from Vietnam, by the way. I was there on holiday with a friend of mine, the guy I run Brain Nevada with. And one of the things that I found really interesting about going to the museums was, you hearing the communist version of things, right? So they say, as the North, we came in and we reunified with the South and we liberated them from the colonial imperial oppressors. And that's sort of strange, the sort of that message you get. There's also a sense in which Vietnam is a play communist place, right? So in 89, they realized, geez, this communism stuff doesn't work very well. People are pretty fucking poor. Why don't we just embrace free market reforms? And so since then, they've had 7% growth every single year. And so you're dealing with this like highly prosperous place. The friend I went with chatted to someone and said, what's your feeling of how things work? He says, oh, it's a wonderful place. Socialism is great. He says, but we pay for it. I pay 20% tax. My friend Jason sort of balked and he said, 20%. He says, I pay 45%. The guy says, wow, your healthcare in South Africa must be fabulous.
Oh, yeah. Fantastic healthcare. It's so good. It's so good that Tabi is in the States getting her glaucoma treatment, or is she hiding from her PhD scandal? I don't know which one.
She's trying. If you can get her eyes fixed, you can read the certificate and see whether she got an MSc or a PhD.
Look, I'm gonna be her advocate. I'm gonna argue on her behalf. Look, it's not her fault. She couldn't read properly because of the glaucoma, and so she thought it said PhD. Anyway. Actually, I'm probably one of the last people to actually say that she committed fraud, because everyone else is jumping on the bandwagon. But I didn't see until today the London School of Economics had said that, no, she didn't graduate from here. So now that they've said that, now I'll call her fraud too. I didn't want criminal injuria charges coming my way.
Interesting enough, one of the first people to get taken down on the fake PhD was Paulo Jordan. So Gareth van Onselen sort of occurred to me. He said, everyone refers to Dr. Paulo Jordan. He was Minister of Arts and Culture and very revered guy. He said, I wonder what his PhD thesis was on. And asked and got stonewalled and thought, that's funny. And of course, there've been a string of people with fake PhDs. I'm not so sure you should be bragging about having a PhD nowadays.
You're just going to get scrutiny.
Well, I often think it tracks with something else. You sort of see some of the most insane views that are out there are uttered by people with PhDs, right? Like if you've got a PhD in English literature, often your takes on things are completely and utterly nonsensical. I think it's very important to be educated and to be wise. I don't think being credentialed is a good idea, and I often think that people go into universities and come out dumber. My background's in philosophy, and philosophy has managed to weather many storms. And on Brain of At, we speak to some of the brightest minds around. But there are some severely stupid positions out there that you find floating around in arts departments by people with PhDs.
I absolutely agree, 100%. To me, an undergraduate degree has always been just a bit better educated, hopefully a bit more erudite, and better at critical thinking analysis with no particular skills in any field other than just introductory. That's a 4-year degree to me. A master's degree begins some professionalization. A PhD, a proper one, is going to make you a professional, but that doesn't mean that you have common sense and that you can be unbiased. I mean, did you see? Okay, first off, I'm going to stake this. I've told my audience, but you can hear it now. Unequivocally, I'm more qualified to be the president of Harvard than Claudine Gay. I have 2 books that are published. She has 0. Oh my gosh. I almost have more academic articles than her too. She's only got a handful of those. And I'm not even an educator. I am an educator, but you get my point. I'm not at university right now. I mean, that's just, and now Harvard's medical school. They have 50 ongoing investigations into doctored research and fraudulent papers written by the CEO of the hospital, the chief operating officer of the hospital, and several senior. Look, again, these aren't institutions of higher learning. They're not universal ideas. These are indoctrination centers and patronage positions for people who have the same political beliefs. And I can't see it any other way. I mean, I tried to resist that conclusion for years because I dealt with universities, but the more I deal with it, the more it's pretty obvious. The people that have bat crap crazy ideas. I mean, look at what's happening in America, Mark. I mean, this wasn't our topic, but this is kind of related in a tangential fashion. The University of California, Berkeley, Students for Democratic Society, all the unrest in the 60s, standing up for rights, ending the Vietnam War, getting the government under control, okay, all right. There's a lot of left people in there, and I got it. But that's a place with a history like that. And then they ban Milo Yiannopoulos from speaking on campus because he's a conservative homosexual. I thought they loved homosexuals, but they don't love Milo. Now, look, Milo he's a different cup of tea. You really, but I'm not for or against the guy. I'm just saying, but why would you try to limit speech? Why would you try to keep political people or former presidents off of your campus? That's what universities are supposed to be. They're supposed to be places where ideas flow freely. And universities have become a cesspool of leftist think. And they're just indoctrination centers.
Yeah, so on free speech, one of my favorite people is Nadine Strossen, who headed up the American Civil Liberties Union and really cares about free speech as an abstract ideal. A lot of people will pretend they care about free speech. They care about it to get their ideas out. And as soon as they win, then they're very willing to shut down other people's free speech rights because they go, well, I don't want to hear it. I don't want other people being influenced. I don't want people to change their minds. I've already won, so shut the fuck up. And so that's what you find at places like Berkeley. So, the place that is sort of like seen as the birth of the free speech movements in American campuses, does incredibly badly on free speech. I think Harvard was ranked the worst by far on free speech. And then you have this disingenuous thing. So when those presidents are, before Congress and have to testify, about what their policies about anti-Semitism and, phrase the question of, would it be a breach of your bullying and harassment policies to call for a genocide against Jews? Then suddenly it's impossible to answer, and we need context, and we really need to know, and how could we possibly tell? I mean, you go and read those policies, it's fucking crystal clear that calling for the genocide against Jews is going to be a breach of those policies. There's no need to kind of get further context. And obviously, if you'd sort of ask them, would it be okay to say, stuff that's critical of Black Lives Matter? Of course not. How dare you? What kind of a racist pig would say that? Get off our campus. So, there's this complete double standard. It's bizarre.
Well, I mean, the whole free speech context, I mean, look, not all speech is free. I mean, you can't endanger people, like in a theater, we've got that. That's the standard. That's the obvious case. You can't sit in a theater and shout fire and frighten people and they get, so that's obviously a constraint on speech. But look, I've always been very critical of South Africa's constitution and its laws. I mean, using the K word makes you a criminal. I got a problem with that. The way that you deal with people who are in that fashion is you ignore them, you isolate them, you push them to the margins of society. You don't bring them to polite company. You don't invite them to dinner, and they either repent or they're not around anybody. But criminalizing speech, I mean, these are natural rights. And, while it may be offensive, it's on college campuses. I'm offended. Good. You should be offended by some things you hear. I'm offended every time Julius Malema opens his mouth, but I'll defend his right to be an idiot, not to sing Kill the Boer, but to be an idiot. I mean, I love his argument now. Well, when we rushed the state, and this is my words, not his, when we rushed the stage, we were exercising our free speech. No, you weren't. You were endangering the life of the president. You're a criminal. Go to jail. But you can say it all day long. Come on. No, it's seriously, but I've criticized South Africa because you don't have free speech in South Africa. People, fear of words is incomprehensible. Particularly when a word gets turned on its head. Words and symbols get misused. The Confederate flag is not the Confederate flag. That was never the Confederate flag, the Confederate States of America. That was the battle flag of the Army of Northern Virginia, co-opted by the lost cause people in the late 19th century, early part of the 20th century. The older veterans dying off, and they're inculcating their kids, and hey, this is we were betrayed, that sort of thing. And they use that battle flag of the Army of Northern Virginia. Now it's considered a racist symbol. It's not a racist symbol. It was a symbol for a military unit. And anyway, so that's one. The swastika. The swastika was not an evil symbol. It was used in Denmark, and it was used in Viking times, and it was used in India, of all things. A very similar symbol for fertility and good luck and things like that. But Hermann Goering used to vacation in Denmark all the time, and he saw it up there. I can tell you, I've been to the Carlsberg Brewery. By the way, one of the best beer tours you'll ever get in Copenhagen. It was the best beer tour. I've been to dozens of breweries. I never drink, though, because I'm always driving. But that brewery, when you walk in, has two elephants in stone carved in the gateway when you walk in. Both of them have blankets on them from India, and they have swastikas on them. But it was co-opted and misused. People should not be afraid of symbols. People should not be afraid of speech. That's my position here. You just ostracize people who are asses, and you ignore them. Now, if they call for violence or threaten someone, that's different. But when you're just using words, people shouldn't be harmed by words, no matter how offensive it is. That's my thought.
Yeah, I mean, as you know, my sort of specialty is in free speech and hate speech. And so I think we share a similar position, which is that I think that there is a point when you can limit your speech. In other words, when you are inciting people to perform an action against others. Mm-hmm. And we think that there's a reasonable possibility that that action will occur. So when you're singing Kill the Boer under conditions where Afrikaners are being brutally murdered on farms, and that Kill the Boer is written in blood on the walls. By the way, I was listening to my cross-examination of Julius Malema the other day, and one of the examples I give to him is this mother and daughter where they were brutally murdered, and one of the women had her breast cut off. And that's very similar to what's happened in Israel. So there's a sort of twin journey here about groups being treated in such similarly inhumane fashion. So there is some speech where I think you should limit it, but that's different to offensive speech. What we're finding in South Africa at the moment is that there's just a strange moving of standards. So depending on who the parties are, depending on the political beliefs of the judge, some speech is protected and some speech is hate speech. It would be very hard to draw kind of golden thread through the cases. It sort of seems kind of arbitrary what's allowed and what's not allowed. The simplest way would be to kind of work out, like, is this the favored party? One of the things that makes things very difficult, of course, is that Julius Malema sits on the Judicial Service Commission. So
yeah,
if you're a judge and you say, if I were to find against this person, would they hold it against me? Well, we know, because Judge Motajane, who held Julius Malema liable for defamation against Trevor Manuel, when he was interviewed by the JSC, Julius said to him, why should I elevate you to the Supreme Court given what you did to me? So there's a strong sense in which it's very hard for judges to operate freely when the EFF are involved in the litigation. There's always this incentive that you could be punished as a judge, and that it might, damage your career prospects. So that undermines the independence of the courts. So, for example, the judge in the Kill the Boer case was recently elevated to the Deputy Judge President of the Labour Court. Now, might be entirely coincidental, but it can create a sense that maybe there's a bias at play here.
Well, I agree 100% with that. The appearance of impropriety is something that people should avoid at all cost. Absolutely avoid at all cost. Hey, folks, you're listening to a conversation that's gone a little bit away from the topic, but it's related to the topic in some respects. And this is a conversation with Mark Oppenheimer, who is a constitutional law advocate in South Africa. Mark, of course, has his own program called Brain in a Vat. It's a philosophy program. It'll wind your head tight listening to some really brilliant minds from around the world talking about these topics that kind of stun people sometimes. You can find the links to that program below the video. It's right down down there. So in the past, when Mark has been a guest, I've neglected to put that. So this time, unprompted, I remember to do it so that people can find Mark. And please go over there and become a subscriber. There's no danger of Mark's channel surpassing mine today. So go become a subscriber. Not that it's a competition. No, but no, it's absolutely, your point is valid here. I mean, the fact that Julius Malema is, I mean, the guy's had more charges against than anybody except Zandile Gumeda. I mean, you know, firing a rifle into a crowd, attacking a police officer. I don't know how he gets off. I mean, I saw the video. That's assault. I mean, it doesn't matter if there's a provocation. I mean, if I call you a name and you come and physically attack me, that doesn't justify it. It may mitigate the punishment, but it doesn't justify it. He gets away with that. He's the gun thing, changing the receiver, and this is ridiculous. And then the kill the boar thing. I mean, so by the way, if we can dive into it a little bit, is that resolved now? Are you allowed to talk about that case? I don't know appeals and what's going on.
I can tell you where it's at the moment,
okay,
which is that it was argued before the Supreme Court of Appeal last year. And I can tell you about something in the hearing. So it's not concluded. And one of the reasons why it's not concluded is because one of the judges, it's turned out in a prior hearing in which AfriForum were before her, in the leave to appeal, she said, I strongly suggest that you ask for my recusal in any further matter in which you draw me as a judge, and then expressed distaste for AfriForum. Then it was discovered the day after the hearing that she'd said this, and the transcript was then produced. She was then asked to recuse herself. She hasn't recused herself, so there will be a recusal hearing before that judge and the other judges. Once that is resolved, then the hearing, may continue in the sense that it may be that it would have to be decided in her absence. It may be that it has to be rerun in front of other judges. It may be that they dismiss the recusal application and then produce a judgment. The Supreme Court of Appeal is an interim court, so in all likelihood, this is a case that would wind up at the Constitutional Court. So to give you an update as to where it is at.
All right. No, because when I posted something or somebody put a comment or when I put it on Twitter because I posted this video and they were like, oh, that's the guy that lost in front of Julius Malema. I'm like, I don't think that case is decided yet in its entirety. So I wrote, nope. Nope. Not yet. Don't get ahead of yourself. Yeah. So, but I mean, ultimately here, back to the topic at hand, which we came to talk about initially, Israel, under international norms, is a sovereign state and has a right to self-defense. Israel, in my view, showed incredible restraint in the aftermath of what happened on October 7th. And I suspect, looking at it from an operational and a strategic standpoint, which is a place where I have a lot of experience, is that it was twofold. Number one, they were caught off guard and they need to assess what was going on and restore security in that region. That was job one. Number two, they knew the world would condemn because of the people always speaking out against Israel, and striking back instantly would not leave a space in there for them to prepare and for credibility. I think by waiting as long as they did and preparing, hopefully they prepared themselves well enough for what the task at hand, but also it gives a fair argument to say that we didn't just strike back. We struck back in a calculated manner, not to kill civilians, but to get Hamas off the gameplay. And that's, I think that's why it happened. Maybe that's wrong, but that's my assessment of what's happened. But they have a right to defend themselves. And the question is, gosh, when will Hamas be gone? That's what I'm concerned about.
Yes. And, Israel has said that it may take, till the end of the year to eradicate Hamas. And I think they also face, as you say, this enormous international pressure to stop. And I wonder if that pressure would have been brought to bear on any other state. So, Americans rightfully attempted to eradicate ISIS. ISIS being, a very sinister organization that would put journalists in cages and burn them alive, and were very good at destroying large chunks of ISIS. I think you still have sort of splinter cells floating around. And many civilians lost their lives during the course of that battle against ISIS. But there wasn't the sense of saying, well, America must stop. It's important that they're eradicated. And so Israel must be given a similar opportunity to eradicate Hamas. You're dealing with an organization that openly declares genocide in its convention. So in its 88 charter, it calls for the destruction of Israel. It's, is openly anti-Semitic in that it calls for Jews to be killed. You don't find that in, by the way, if you go and look at the Israeli Declaration of Independence, it's really interesting. in that it says that Israel will be a place for people to live regardless of their faith. The idea was that it was open to Arab Israelis who'd be living there to form part of the new state, and that you really had this olive branch. And instead what happened, of course, was that Israel declares independence and is then attacked. And so that obviously makes it very difficult, between those two groups.
Well,
but Israel, I think, has been an olive branch on many occasions.
They have put the olive branch out there many occasions. Brett Sesson has been a member on the channel for 26 months. Said, isn't racial discrimination unconstitutional in South Africa? Yeah, I believe it is, but that doesn't mean it doesn't happen. I mean, look at all the race-based laws. I mean, the Tourism Relief Fund that came out in the wake of the Rona event specifically said that only historically disadvantaged people, in other words, Black South Africans who it was targeted for, could benefit from that program. The North Gauteng High Court said it was legal. It was appealed to the Supreme Court of Appeal and was overturned. But I mean, by then all the money was gone. There wasn't much money to begin with. So it was all gone. So nobody got to benefit from it. So yeah, you can have a constitution. We have a constitution. The Constitution says the government cannot abridge the right to free speech. But guess what? The FBI, the Department of Homeland Security, the CDC, the National Institutes for Health all colluded, cajoled, or coerced Twitter into silencing speech that they didn't like. That's a violation of the Constitution. There should be federal officials in a federal courthouse now being prosecuted for crimes in violation of our Constitution. The Constitution is only as good as the people who defend it. I defended it in uniform for 36 and a half years, not for whites, not for blacks, not for browns, not for Jews, not for Christians, not for Muslims, but for Americans and those permanent residents legally allowed to be here, many of whom want to become Americans at some point. That's who I defend the Constitution for. And for our friends, partners, and allies around the world. The Constitution doesn't apply to them, but we try to bring the same spirit as long as it's something they accept. That's what I did for 36 years in uniform. That kind of defense is necessary to protect the Constitution, but political leaders must not abuse it. In the state of Pennsylvania, our governor violated the Constitution's due process clause. He violated multiple aspects, including free speech. He also violated Article 1 of the Pennsylvania Constitution, and he got away with it. So you can have a constitution, you can have laws. If you don't use them and you don't have the integrity and the internal fortitude to protect them and to ensure that they're adhered to, then they mean nothing. This document means absolutely nothing other than a book you can buy somewhere in a store if it's not adhered to. And in my country, there's an active effort to toss this out the window, because people lie about our history. America's a fundamentally racist country. Really? Really? I'll tell you what, man, all these people of color and Muslims and Hindus coming to this country must love racism because they won't stop coming. They're just pouring in. Give me a freaking break. The original sin of America was slavery. Oh, so we're the only country in the world that had slavery in 1619. No, we weren't even a country. It was a British colony in Virginia. We weren't a country until we declared independence in 1776, and we fought for it until 1783, the Peace of Paris. We were not the people who invented slavery. We were not the people who had it throughout our history. We had it at the beginning. We created a system that could eradicate it in due time, because we would not have had a country had we not given that position that we could move towards it. If we'd simply said slavery is illegal, there wouldn't have been a USA. It never would have happened. We never would have had a country. And today you'd have southern states of North America. They'd have their own country. And who knows, by this time, slavery is becoming unprofitable at some point. It probably wouldn't exist, but the bigotry would still be there. The point here is that judging people from the past through the moral lens of our current circumstances is illegitimate. We can look and say that slavery is abomination. It is. It continues today. It's an abomination. It's morally bankrupt. But I'm approaching this as a Christian in the 21st century, having grown up in America and supporting the defending Constitution, not a farmer in rural Virginia in 1776 who's voting for my representative going to the Continental Congress. Stop judging people by the past. If we do, then why the heck do we have a King Shaka International Airport? The guy's a tyrannical murderer. He killed all his siblings, all his kids. Anyway, that's my point. That was a bit of a long one there, Mark. You're very patient.
So I'll tell you something interesting. I did a live debate before October 7th with two Islamic apologists at the University of Johannesburg. One of them is Mohammed Hijab. And I raised some of my concerns with Islamic ethics. And one of the things I said when we're judging any ethical system is that there are certain things that are abominable. And I gave slavery as an example. And you'd expect everyone to condemn slavery. Muhammad Hijab, on the other hand, produced a video in defense of slavery on the basis that this is something that is allowed by the Quran. And actually, slavery isn't as bad as you think it is.
No, it's all puppies and rainbows.
Yeah. So this is also this strange thing that slavery is still an ongoing practice, right? I mean, the Americans, came to their senses and eradicated it as a practice. And it is one of those things that is practiced in the Islamic world. How much condemnation do you find of that?
I lived in Mauritania. I lived in Mauritania, where it was legal until this century, and it still persists. But it was openly legal. Nobody criticized Mauritania. Nobody.
Yeah. I'm interested to know, given that you're in Pennsylvania, has your view on John Federman changed? So he's come out as one of the most pro-Israel Democrats around, right?
No, my view on John Federman has not changed. I think that he's recovered from his stroke. And that's showing. I don't know if he had speech therapy or he also had psychological counseling. He went to a counselor at Walter Reed. Maybe that's right. But my view is that he's a lazy, useless, race hustling politician, and I have no use for him whatsoever. I appreciate he's speaking some common sense now, but my view of him has not changed. Not changed not even remotely. The guy showed up for work 30% of the time as the lieutenant governor. He just didn't come to work. Nobody held him to a standard. He walks around like a buffoon wearing, gym shorts and hoodies, in the most, august bodies of governance. I mean, that's ridiculous. So my view of John Federman has not changed. I am impressed by the fact that he can speak cogently now and rationally. He's actually lucid. I mean, that's good. That's good. And actually his positions, he sounds like he's a conservative half the time now, if not more than half the time. But no, my view of him has not changed. Not changed at all. I will be tolerant of him now and listen to him. Before I could just stomach the guy. But now I'll listen to him. So I guess in that respect, something has changed. Look, I don't care if you disagree with me, but you're respectful and we can have a conversation about things, even if it's emotional and animated, but we're respecting each other, then I'm okay with that. But anyway, so that's kind of where I sit on Federman now. But yeah. Anyway.
So if more Democrats had a stroke, maybe they'd become conservative.
Well, it's like, young people are liberal and then they get older and they wise up and they become conservative for the most part, except for, our favorite commie there, Bernie Sanders. Got 2 pairs of shorts, man. Only got 2 pairs of underwear. Famous joke they did. He only had 2 pairs of underwear. But, of course, Bernie Sanders, who has 3 homes, is a multimillionaire, went to the Soviet Union for his honeymoon. Seriously, it's not like he went to a dacha down on the Crimea, or, in the Black Sea. No. He went to Moscow and Leningrad for his, which is now St. Petersburg again, for his honeymoon. Really? I mean, Fidel Castro didn't go to Moscow for his honeymoon. What the heck, come on. Even Cyril Ramaphosa didn't go there for his honeymoon. I don't know where he went. Maybe Pala Pala.
It is an astonishing thing that, those who trumpet communism the most tend to be very well off. And tend to have a lot to benefit from it, right? It's wonderful being a champagne socialist. You don't have to live with the consequences of your terrible ideas. If you're in part of the vanguard, you get a shop in the special communist store where everything's heavily discounted with your Soviet salary. So the ANC do these trips out to Cuba. And they'll send out, people who are counselors in Johannesburg to go out. And one of the things that a friend of mine told me was that they would have blacked out windows so that you couldn't look out in the streets while you're driving around on your bus. But then when you'd kind of get dropped off at certain spots, everything would look spectacular. I mean, it's really show theater stuff going on there.
Okay, just let me digress for a second here about show theater. Did you see the video of Brendan Kavanagh, who's a musician in the UK? He was at the St. Pancras station, I think, in London, and there's a piano there. If people walk up, how they put them in malls and places like that. You sit down and anybody can play. So he does live streaming on YouTube. He's called Mr. K Boogie Woogie or something like that is his account. And so he sits down and he starts playing, but he sets the camera up and he's got someone with him. And the other guy also plays piano too. And these Chi-Coms, these pro-Chinese communists, are standing in the background with their literature trying to convince people in the UK how great and wonderful communist China is, which also, like Vietnam, adopted free market reforms. That's the only reason the economy took off like it did. But anyway, it's not a free market, but they adopted some of the elements of it. Anyway, but they're standing back there, and then he's playing the music. It's all fun and everything. You know how this is. People do this, and other people recording it as they walk by because it's really impressive. And then one of the Chinese starts walking over. And the guy says, I think that either the Chinese are here listening. How cool is that? And so he gets up to talk to him, and she says, we're from Chinese television. You can't film us here. He goes, why? Oh, you're not allowed to film us. But you're in public, you're just, you're in the train station. Well, no, will I get in trouble with the Chinese? Oh, maybe not. You're not getting in trouble with the Chinese. But so then they called the police, the Chinese did, to make him stop recording them in public. This reminded me of when I was at a museum in the UK, and I was trying to take pictures of coins, these medieval coins that were in a glass, and a school trip happened to come by, all these little kids, 5, 6 years old, and I'm taking a picture. They came in the frame, so I stopped, I let them get in there, and I took the picture. It's like 2 feet over their head. I'm not taking pictures of kids. I'm not, and besides, it's public. I'm not taking pictures. And this teacher comes over, you can't take pictures. I was like, do you work here? No, I'm here with the school kids. You can't take pictures of those children. I said, well, first off, I'm not taking pictures of children. Second, we're in public. If you don't want children to be in a photograph, then keep them in the school. I mean, come on. Am I supposed to go to a rugby game? Oh, I got to throw all my pictures out. Some kid showed up in it. It's one thing to be hanging around a school playground and going, taking pictures. It's quite another to be in a public venue at a museum taking photographs of displays and a kid's head pops in it. But it's the same sort of thing. It drives me nuts. These Chinese communists are telling him in his own country that he's not allowed to film them in public. Then leave public. Go elsewhere.
This is, of course, very amusing from a surveillance state, right?
Oh, exactly. Well, to be fair, they're both surveillance states. You can't go anywhere in the UK without being on their camera. But China's much worse. Yeah. No, but I mean, it is pretty comical, though, isn't it? I mean, I'm sure there's CCTV watching this whole thing unfold, and we could probably go to the St. Pancras train station and say, hey, let's see the video of that. But you're right. It is amusing to hear these Chi-coms tell this guy in his own country that he can't take pictures of them in public. What are you so afraid of? Are you like, you working for the secret police here, Anyway.
So, given that you touched on sport recently, what's your take on Dricus du Plessis?
My take on him is I don't follow Ultimate Fighting Championship. That's not my cup of tea. Although I will admit that when I was in Vegas for the Rugby Sevens, I wandered through the MGM Grand one time, and they had like the little, not the cable, but the rope that hangs there. And I wound up in a line. I'm like, what do we stand in line for? Oh, it's for UFC, man. The fighters are up here. And I'm looking, oh, okay, thanks. And I went to the comedy club. But anyway, because that's not my sort of thing. But if you're talking about his comments and what she said, South Africa is a mess, cool. I don't like politics in sport. But I mean, that's not a team sport. It's not a franchise related to a city. It's an individual. If Djokovic wants to say something political, I have less of a concern than if Kaiser Chiefs want to say something political, if you follow what I'm saying. I don't think it's hypocritical. I prefer that athletes don't get involved in politics, but an individual, it's an individual. They're affecting themselves. But when it's a team, it affects a lot more. So the Springboks shouldn't be walking around with fight racism on their jersey. We don't need them to tell us that. We can fight racism on our own. We shouldn't be seeing, Black Lives Matter painted at the end of a National Football League thing. That's unacceptable in my view. But if one of those players becomes a championship bowler and they want to talk about it, more on them. That's my take. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's a good distinction to draw. I like that. And I do think it's very interesting that, you said, now that I have this platform, I want to tell you about how terrible farmers are, and that the South African government is the worst in the world. Although when asked to compare to Biden, he did hesitate.
Yeah, that shows true colors there. I mean, not entirely reformed. Yeah, but no, yeah, it's exactly. Look, in the case of. Look, I mean, honestly, I think let's go back to the boycotts for New Zealand during the Springboks. They wouldn't play the Springboks. I mean, that was, in my view, ridiculous. And all these people charging on the field when they went there and played with their protests, like they're so high and mighty, like they never committed any crimes against the Maori. Stop. You're not clean as a driven snow here. Let sports be sports. The 1980 boycott of Moscow, I was totally against it. Totally against it. U.S. athletes should have been allowed to perform there. That's when for me, that's when politics enter sport. I was too small when Munich happened. I remember it, but I mean, it didn't influence me. But by the time that the boycott in 1980, a sports thing, that was, and I'd grown to cherish sports, baseball, Bruce Jenner or Caitlyn Jenner, the decathlon, all that stuff. Anyway, so in 76 Montreal Olympics, but 19...
She won 5 races for the men's decathlon. That's an unbelievable achievement for a woman.
It is, except she wasn't a woman. Anyway, so sport was a big part of my life. And then 1980, Carter boycotts the Olympics. I was opposed to that. Then in 84, the Soviets boycott it's just stupid. We want to see the best athletes in the world compete. Simple as that. And athletes shouldn't suffer because of the politics of their nation. Sports is meant to be a competition like life, but also meant to bring people together. And so I'm not a big fan of the politics in sport. It irritates me to no end. Even the National Hockey League now, they wheel out Willie Ree, the first black player in the NHL. He's like almost 90 now. Really great guy. Was a heck of a hockey player, but he only played for a short period of time because of bigotry and racism. But they run around like there's bigotry and racism in hockey. There aren't a lot of black folks living in northern Canada on ice rinks, and freezing their butt off in January. There's a reason why most of the people playing hockey are from Canada, Sweden, Russia, Finland. There's a reason they come from those places. There aren't many hockey rinks in South Africa. There are a few, and there's a South African national hockey team for those who didn't know it, but not many people play hockey in South Africa for a reason. You're not going to find anybody in the Congo playing hockey. So it's not racism, it's circumstances. It's the same reason why I'm pink. My ancestors like, damn, it's hot here. They were walking around East Africa like, no. And so, they had a little ice age. It sucked up all the water, and you had these little places you could hop across, almost crawl all the way over to Yemen. Long before the Houthi got there, they got there and they're like, damn, it's hotter over here. So they went north. And I don't know if they went through Judea or they went through, through the Mesopotamia, but they went somewhere and it was still too hot and mosquitoes, all over the place. So they kept going. They wound up in the Caucasus. And there they linked up with the Neanderthals, and they had some good weekends, and that's why I got a little bit of Neanderthal DNA in me. Anyway, the point is they kept going north, getting away from the heat, and eventually there wasn't enough sun up there. Man, we lost our good tans. Anyway, you get my point. Silliness. People are silly. This is nothing. DNA. The difference is, if we weren't the same, we couldn't procreate. It's as simple as that. Simple. A dog and a cat can't procreate. Now, I know a horse and a donkey can, but that's because they're not that far apart, genetically. But Homo sapiens are Homo sapiens. Get over yourself, bigots, racists, and haters. Enough of it. Enough. I don't tolerate it. That's why it's funny, Mark, when earlier this year, because I'd commented about Steve Hofmeyer being kicked off that cruise, and my point was that for what? I mean, it was bait and switch. They advertised Steve Hofmeyer knowing full well they weren't going to have him on the cruise, and they pulled the wool at the last minute and all these people. And so I did a thing, and this leftist who lived in Amsterdam from South Africa started making videos about me, calling me a white supremacist and a fat shamer. And I'm like, really? A white supremacist? Okay. You got any evidence for that?
I'm trying to work out what's worse, being a white supremacist or a fat shamer. I haven't checked out
today. I'm not sure which. The other thing is transphobic. I'm not afraid of transsexual people. I feel bad for them for what they have to deal with. And for those who are genuinely trans, not all these latchers on that are fake. They're not really trans. They're just claiming it for attention. But the genuine people, I feel for them. I have empathy for them. And homophobia? Why would I be afraid of homosexuals? What are they like? They have some special power I don't know about? Woo! Come on. That's the whole concept of phobia. It's ridiculous. Anyway, it's people. People are crap. They really are. But I think we've hit the nail on the head. Israel has a right to self-defense, and South Africa's case before to me, I found their case offensive because they didn't produce evidence. They produce hearsay and tweets and videos and things wholly out of context, and no discussion of October 7th, no discussion of the reason why Israel was there in the first place. None of that. You can't present a case with only one side of the argument, and they're claiming to be objective. It's no different than where's Israel and the Rohingya? Or not Israel, sorry. Where is South Africa and Rohingya? When has the ANC taken the military junta to the ICJ over what they're doing to the Rohingya and to other ethnic groups in Myanmar? Where is the ANC over what's happening to the Uyghurs in China? Nowhere. Clearly, there are elements of genocide in both of those cases. And you could argue a case of genocide in both those cases. And if I'm not mistaken, China, I have to double check, but I think they're signatory to the Genocide Convention. And Burma was. I don't know if Myanmar, what their status is. But if they are, then you have a case. But why are you silent on that? What's going on there, Me thinks that the country with 82 murders per day and a judicial system that doesn't work, maybe you ought to focus on that first.
There's also a sense in which when South Africa said we had an obligation to be in that court, well, then you open yourself up to what you've just said, which is
Yeah.
if you had this obligation, then you would have also had the obligation in all these other instances where you did nothing. And they could have gotten involved in the Myanmar case, as you say. They could have joined the Gambia. They didn't. They could have been concerned about Russia's invasion of Ukraine. They didn't. And there was litigation on that front as well. So, yeah, it's hard to kind of claim the moral high ground in these circumstances.
They have no moral high ground. I just had a super chat from Andreo Fick, who's been a recent new viewer to the program. Thanks for that. Thank you for that. That's my Bavarian cowbell. And then there was a question. I don't know if you can answer this, Mark, and if you can, I think people. RJ's been asking a lot of questions. There was another gentleman asked questions too, asking us about all the peace offers and things in the past. But that would take a whole separate broadcast to talk about all the times Israel has offered agreements that the Palestinians or the Palestinian Authority or Hamas have rejected. But thank you for the super chat, Andreo. And the question here was from RJ. Says, what cases is Mark currently involved in? Well, we know he's involved in the Kill the Boer case with Joyce Malema, which is still ongoing. Are you able to tell us cases you're involved in? Are these public knowledge? Anything you can tell us about them? You have to understand, folks, as an advocate or attorneys, people can't disclose things in cases. So it may be a sensitive question. So I don't want people to say, well, Mark's not answering the question. So can you tell us anything, Mark?
Yes, maybe what's better is if people want to know the cases I've been involved in.
Yeah, that's probably better. Yeah, tell us just a couple of give us some wave tops of a couple of the big cases you've done.
Yeah, so I've been involved in a whole range of these free speech and hate speech cases. The biggest hate speech case is probably the Kwalani case, which the Constitutional Court decided and invalidated portions of our hate speech legislation for being unconstitutional. And that has sort of really set a lot of our norms. I was involved in the flag litigation around whether the old South African flag should be banned. I'm involved in a case around whether South Africa's election should have been postponed in 2019 because of COVID. We managed to ensure that the elections went ahead. So that gives you some sense. A fair chunk of them have been televised, so they're available to watch. I have, as you say, there's Brandon Navat, and there's also a personal YouTube channel, which is just Mark Oppenheimer, which has most of the footage of those cases and of various interviews that I've done on television. So that gives you a sense of the stuff that I've done.
Well, there you go. Hopefully, RJ, that satisfies your question there. Mark, we could probably talk for a long time. You've got things to do. It's late in the evening. I really enjoyed our chance to get back together again. We'll have to do it more often if you're interested. I'm not trying to rope you into a segment right now. I've got other segments, but I'm just saying if you want to do it, we can get back together and do this in future. But any final thoughts about this situation? If you want to wrap it up, if a guy works in law, a chance for a summation here. Any summation here on what we've talked about today as far as Israel, ANC's case, and the ICJ, and maybe if you want to make a prediction, what you think the court is going to do. I kind of gave them an out, saying they could dismiss it on a procedural basis because it wasn't legitimate. But go ahead, your chance for summation. Mark Oppenheimer, it's your floor.
Yes, so I agree with you that the South African case is a libelous case. I think it was done for political purposes. I think the ANC were, in all likelihood, financially enriched to bring that litigation for their election efforts. I think that the litigation itself doesn't meet the standards. It's not a plausible case of genocide. I don't think they should get any of the relief that they've sought. And I think that the Israelis, under very small amounts of time, were able to thoroughly rebut the South African case. Many of my colleagues who don't really hold up a flag for Israel thought that the South African case evaporated once they heard the Israeli case. In terms of making a prediction, my bar rules don't allow me to sort of prognosticate about future litigation. So I think it's a wait and see. I can sort of say that there are a number of options available to that court, one of which would be to dismiss it on the technical basis you've mentioned. The other one would be to grant all or some of the relief sought by South Africa or modify the relief. And the third would, of course, be to dismiss the case. It is brought on an urgent basis. So there's sort of speculation that a judgment would be handed down sometime before the 5th of February. So it'll be interesting to sort of keep an eye on that. One thing I'll say as well, which is that you've managed to come to South Africa on many occasions, and it's been wonderful to meet you in person after many of our online discussions. And I managed to do a little tour to the States last year in March and do a bit of lecturing. And I'd love to replicate what you do, which is come and sort of discuss some of the work that I'm involved in South Africa and the States. And I know that South Africans have always loved meeting you in person.
Well, it's very kind of you, Mark. Folks, there was no money under the table for that endorsement. Just make sure that's clear up front. No, it's very kind of you. Yeah, no, if you get back here, please let me know. If I can link up, happy to do that. Love to do that. I've said very poor success with South Africans' trips because we're a big country. It's huge. People think South Africa's big. America's a big place, of course, compared to Russia, it's not. But but it's a huge place, and But I'd love to link up with you on this side as well. That'd be pretty cool. As far as by the way, great summation. And I was unaware that because I don't know the rules that you work under in your profession, because I'm not in that profession. Although some people tried to push me that way many years ago. But you can't speculate. That's fine. I appreciate that, and thanks for telling us that. But as far as the ICJ, and this is what I'm going to say here, and I'll give a couple cases really quick before we wrap up. Number one, the Sududu Island in the Chobe River. Namibia and Botswana went to the International Court of Justice for a genuine dispute between the two parties, which they couldn't resolve over 2 decades ago, and the International Court of Justice awarded Sududu Island based on historical maps and information and treaties to Botswana. And so Sududu Island, now they call it Kisikeli, I think, in Namibia, but it's Sududu Island, and it's both parties accepted the outcome. And so we had a resolution. In Nigeria and Cameroon, the Bokassi Peninsula, there's an Anglophone region which was awarded to Cameroon based on when it had been a German colony, and Nigeria and Cameroon accepted the court's decision. We have an outcome. China was taken to the International Court of Justice over the South China Sea and its fictitious 9-dash line and its occupation of the Paracels, the Spratlys, and the Scarborough Shoals. And the International Court of Justice said that they don't have territorial claim to that, and it changed nothing. So my point here is that even if the ICJ finds against Israel, it's a toothless tiger. There's no means of enforcement. It would, however, potentially lead to condemnation and countries to have an excuse to start boycotting and doing sanctions by using it as a backstop. Oh, look, see, the court ruled against them. We're not going to trade with them. That could happen, but the court itself doesn't have court police. They aren't going to confiscate Israeli shipping or take their bank accounts. So it's a toothless tiger from that standpoint. And the best case to prove that is the China case with the South China Sea. Do you think anything I just said there is incorrect, or am I on the money?
Yeah, that strikes me as correct. The most recent example, of course, is that the court ordered Russia to stop its military incursions in Ukraine.
Oh, yeah, that's right. I forgot about that.
No, thanks.
Yeah, we see how that went.
Yeah,
it went very well. Okay, with that, folks, thanks a lot for watching today. We've had a big audience, well over 100 for almost the entire stream. Appreciate that. Mark, it's always a pleasure. By the way, Happy New Year. And I hope that you had a good Hanukkah, too. I mean, we just passed that season.
Yeah, thank you very much.
All right, cool beans. All right, folks, thanks a lot. We'll catch you here next time on the program, and that's going to wrap it up for today. I'll be back tomorrow unless some news breaks. Oh, I'll be back tonight. I'm sorry. The New Hampshire primaries, that's right, tonight at either 10 or 11 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, which will be early in the morning for South Africans and Europeans even earlier, depending on how the polls are going. If most of the voting is in by 9:30, then I'll go live at 10. If not, I'll wait till 11. Because unlike the legacy media, I'm not going to come out and say, based on 2 exit polls, Donald Trump gets 97% of the vote. Not going to do that. We're not going to do that. Anyway, so we'll see you later on. I think tonight will be interesting. Depending on how well Trump does, it may push Haley out of the race. If she gets over 40%, she'll stay until she gets trounced in South Carolina, her home state, and then she'll have to drop out. Anyway, that's it. From Pennsylvania and from South Africa, Mark Oppenheimer, Chris Wyatt. Thanks a lot, everybody. Take care. Mark, take care of yourself. Cheers.
Just like the street lights lit this town, like a fire in a blaze, gotta burn it down.
All right, here we are, folks.